Standing in the center of the marble foyer she had polished for a decade, 41-year-old Althea watched as her husband of 15 years, Julian, slid a single gold-embossed envelope across the mahogany console. Inside was a finalized divorce decree and a non-negotiable directive to vacate their estate within 60 minutes, issued just hours after Julian publicly declared he had won a $300 million jackpot. He didn't look at her, merely checking his platinum watch and whispering, "The locks change at noon, Althea. Try to leave with some dignity." Hello friends, welcome to our story. We are so incredibly grateful to have you with us today. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up, and hit that notification bell so you never miss these deep dives into the human heart. We love hearing from our global community. Please drop a comment and let us know where you are watching from. Are you joining us from the bustling streets of New York, the quiet suburbs of Toronto, the heat of Sydney, or perhaps somewhere in beautiful South Africa? We read every single one. Now let us begin. The silence that followed Julian's departure was not empty. It was heavy, vibrating with the ghost of a life that had vanished in the blink of an eye. Althea stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the envelope. To any outsider, she was the picture of a woman defeated. A stay-at-home wife who had traded her youth and a promising career in corporate auditing to support the mercurial rise of an investment mogul. Julian was 44, a man who thrived on the alpha energy of the boardroom, a man who viewed people as assets to be leveraged or liabilities to be liquidated. And today Althea had been liquidated. But as the grandfather clock in the hallway ticked toward the 30-minute mark, Althea didn't cry. She didn't pack. Instead, she walked slowly toward the kitchen, her heels clicking with a rhythmic, military precision against the limestone floor. She pulled a small, crumpled slip of paper from the pocket of her silk robe. It was a lottery ticket purchased 3 days ago from a dusty gas station on the outskirts of town, a place Julian would never be caught dead in. She compared the numbers on the ticket to the ones flashing on the muted television screen in the lounge. They matched perfectly. Every single one. The irony was a physical weight in the room. Julian believed he had won the lottery. He had spent the morning on a frantic, ego-fueled press tour, claiming he had found the winning ticket in his old leather briefcase. He had already contacted high-profile lawyers and wealth managers, positioning himself as the sole architect of this new fortune. What Julian didn't know, what he couldn't possibly fathom, was that the ticket he had found was a clever forgery Althea had placed there weeks ago as a test of his character. The real ticket, the one worth $300 million, was currently trembling in her hand. The betrayal had started long before the lottery ticket entered the picture. Althea had felt the shift a year ago. The late nights that didn't align with his firm's schedule, the sudden change in his phone's passcode, the way he started talking about fresh starts and shedding dead weight. Julian thought he was being subtle, but Althea was a woman trained to find discrepancies in the most complex ledgers. She had spent the last 6 months silently documenting his systematic siphoning of their joint funds into offshore accounts held under the name Nova Strategic Holdings. She knew he was planning to leave her penniless. She just hadn't expected him to be so cruel about the timing. When the news of the jackpot hit the local headlines that morning, Julian had undergone a terrifying transformation. He hadn't hugged her. He hadn't celebrated with her. He had walked into the kitchen, tossed the divorce papers on the island, and told her that he was moving on to a life that matched his new tax bracket. He assumed the money was his alone because the ticket he held was found in his briefcase. In his mind he had already won. He didn't realize that in his haste to discard the woman who knew all his secrets, he had walked right into a cage of his own making. Althea moved to the study, sitting at the desk she had used to manage their household finances for over a decade. She took a deep breath and dialed a number she had memorized weeks ago. It wasn't a divorce lawyer. It was a man named Silas Thorne, a specialist in high-stakes corporate litigation and a former colleague from her auditing days. "Silas," she said, her voice a calm, low melody. "It's time." He took the bait. "He's already claimed the win publicly. We have exactly 48 hours before the first disbursement check is processed." The conversation was brief and clinical. Althea wasn't looking for a simple half-split of their assets. She was looking for total restoration. Julian's fatal flaw was his arrogance. He assumed Althea was just a housewife who had forgotten her skills. He didn't know she had spent her evenings for the last year rebuilding the digital paper trail of his embezzlement from his own firm. A crime he committed to build his escape fund, long before the lottery was even a factor. The lottery win was merely the catalyst she needed to bring him into the public eye, where his fall would be witnessed by the very peers he sought to impress. By 11:45 a.m., the house was swarming with a private security team Julian had hired to escort Althea from the premises. He stood by the front door, arms crossed, looking at her with a mixture of pity and boredom. "I left a suitcase for you by the gate," he said. "The rest of your things will be sent to a storage unit." "I've been generous, Althea. Most men in my position wouldn't have given you a settlement at all." Althea stopped in front of him, her expression unreadable. She reached out and straightened his silk tie, a gesture so intimate and domestic it made him flinch. "You're right, Julian," she whispered, her eyes locking onto his. "You've been exactly the man I thought you were. I hope that 300 million buys you the peace of mind you're going to need." She walked past the security guards, out the front door, and down the long winding driveway without looking back once. She didn't take the suitcase. She stepped into a waiting black car that Julian assumed was an Uber. It wasn't. It was a mobile office, equipped with 3 monitors and a secure satellite uplink, where Silas Thorne was already waiting. Inside the car, the atmosphere was electric. Silas looked at her with a grim smile. "The press is already calling him the luckiest man in the state. His firm's stock just jumped 10% on the news of his personal liquidity. He's at his absolute peak, Althea, which means the drop is going to be vertical." Althea opened her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys. "He hasn't realized the winning ticket he's holding has a specific security watermark missing," she said. "The lottery commission will flag it the moment he tries to officially claim the lump sum. But by then, he will have already signed the affidavits claiming ownership of the funds." This was the choice that would destroy her that Julian thought he had made. The choice to cast her aside. But the true choice had been Althea's. The choice to remain silent and let him walk into the trap of his own greed. As they drove toward the city, Althea watched the suburban sprawl give way to glass skyscrapers. She felt a strange sense of mourning, not for the man, but for the years she had spent believing in a partnership that was actually a predatory arrangement. But mourning was for the weak, and Althea was currently the most powerful woman Julian didn't know existed. If you are still watching at this point, thank you for your incredible support. Please drop a comment with the phrase "the truth prevails," so we can see who is truly following this high-stakes game of chess. Your engagement helps us bring more of these stories to life, and we love seeing your theories in the comments. Do you think Julian will see it coming? Or is he too blinded by the gold? Let us know. By the afternoon of the first day, Julian was hosting an impromptu celebration at an exclusive rooftop bar in Manhattan. He was surrounded by friends who had appeared out of the woodwork the moment the news broke. He was drinking $5,000 champagne and telling anyone who would listen about his instinct for the winning numbers. He was already talking about buying a yacht, a villa in Tuscany, and a new headquarters for his firm. He looked like a king, but to Althea, watching him through the lens of a private investigator's long-range camera from a nearby building, he looked like a man standing on a trapdoor. "He's signing the papers for the new penthouse as we speak," Silas noted, checking his tablet. "He's using his current firm's assets as collateral, assuming the lottery winnings will cover the bridge loan by Monday. He's over-leveraging himself based on a fortune that doesn't exist. Althea nodded. This was the ticking clock. Once Julian signed those loan agreements based on a fraudulent asset, he wasn't just a jerk, he was a felon. She had timed everything to ensure that his public declaration of the win was documented by every major news outlet. He couldn't claim it was a mistake later. As evening fell, Althea checked into a quiet hotel under her maiden name. She spent the night reviewing the final piece of her leverage, the Nova Strategic documents. Julian had been stealing from his clients, many of whom were powerful, dangerous men who didn't take kindly to being defrauded. He had planned to use the divorce and his disappearing wealth to cover the tracks of his embezzlement. The fake lottery win had given him the confidence to stop hiding. He thought he was untouchable. He was, in fact, more vulnerable than he had ever been in his life. The next morning, the tension reached a breaking point. Julian arrived at the state lottery headquarters in a motorcade, hounded by reporters. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit, a smile plastered on his face. He walked into the high-security room to present his ticket for the official validation ceremony. Althea was there, too, sitting in the back of the room behind a glass partition, disguised in a simple wig and glasses. She wanted to see the moment the light went out in his eyes. She wanted to see the moment he realized that the liability he had kicked out of his house was the only person who could have saved him. The lead official, a stern woman with 30 years of experience, took Julian's ticket and placed it under a high-resolution scanner. The silence in the room was absolute. Julian was leaning against the desk, radiating an unearned confidence. He looked at the official and joked, "I hope your machine is ready for that many zeros." The official didn't laugh. She frowned, squinting at the monitor. She ran the ticket through a second time, then a third. She looked up at Julian, her expression shifting from professional to suspicious. "Mr. Vance," she said slowly, "we have a significant problem." Julian's smile didn't vanish immediately. It wavered like a flickering candle. "Problem? It's a winning ticket. I've checked the numbers 1,000 times." The official pushed a button on her desk, and 2 security officers moved toward the door. "The numbers matched the winning draw, sir. However, the serial number on this paper belongs to a book of tickets that wasn't even distributed to the region where you claim to have purchased this. Furthermore, the microprinting is inconsistent with our official mint." She paused, her voice dropping to a dangerous chill. "This ticket is a sophisticated counterfeit. And since you've already signed an affidavit of ownership under penalty of perjury, I'm afraid we have to involve the authorities." The room erupted. Reporters began shouting, cameras flashed like strobe lights, and Julian's face turned a shade of gray that Althea had only ever seen on a corpse. He looked around wildly, his mouth opening and closing but no sound coming out. He looked at his lawyer, Marcus Thorne, who was already backing away from him as if he were radioactive. It was in that moment of absolute chaos that Julian's eyes drifted toward the glass partition. For a split second the crowd shifted and he saw her. He saw Althea. She wasn't wearing her glasses anymore. She was looking directly at him and she was smiling. Not a smile of malice but a smile of pure, cold clarity. He tried to lunge toward the glass, but the security officers tackled him to the ground. "Althea!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "What did you do? What did you do?" The cameras captured every second of his breakdown. The luckiest man in the world, being dragged out of the building in handcuffs, accused of a massive fraud. Althea stood up, adjusted her coat and walked out the back exit. She had 48 hours to finalize the second phase of her plan. The lottery fraud was just the beginning. The real collapse was going to happen in the boardroom, where Julian's Nova Strategic secrets were about to be delivered to his most vengeful clients. As Althea stepped back into the black car, Silas was already on the phone with the district attorney's office. "We have the forensic audit ready for delivery," he said. Althea leaned back against the leather seat and closed her eyes. She thought about the house, the 15 years of silence, and the way Julian had looked at her like she was nothing. She reached into her bag and touched the cool laminated surface of the real winning ticket. She hadn't decided what to do with the money yet. Maybe she would claim it, or maybe she would donate it all to the very people Julian had stepped on to climb his mountain. But for now, the only thing that mattered was the quiet. The car moved through the city, passing a giant digital billboard that was still displaying Julian's face from a morning news segment. The headline read, "A win for the ages." Althea watched as the screen glitched and shifted to a breaking news alert. Lottery winner arrested for fraud. The reversal was complete. The man who wanted to be a king was now a cautionary tale, and the woman he thought was a footnote was the one holding the pen. But as the sun set over the Hudson, Althea knew the hardest part was still to come. She had to decide who she was going to be now that she wasn't Julian's wife. She looked at her reflection in the window. The lines around her eyes seemed less like marks of age and more like a map of a long, hard-won battle. She had survived a marriage that was a war of attrition, and she had come out the other side with her soul intact. Julian had believed that money was the ultimate power, but Althea knew better. The ultimate power was truth, and the patience to wait for the right moment to tell it. As the car pulled up to Silas's office for the final signing, Althea felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in decades. The game was over, and for the first time in her life she wasn't a player. She was the house. The cold steel of the handcuffs biting into Julian's wrists was a sensation he hadn't prepared for in his $300 million fantasies. As he was shoved into the back of a precinct cruiser, the flashing blue and red lights reflected off the tinted glass of a departing black sedan, the car carrying Althea. He didn't know that the forgery she had planted was only the fuse. The real explosion was sitting in a digital vault, waiting for a single keystroke. Althea sat in the back of that sedan, her face a mask of calm, as she watched her husband's empire of ego begin its terminal descent into the pavement. Please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who loves a story where justice finally finds its way home. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us in the comments, do you believe in second chances? Or do you think some betrayals are simply unforgivable? We love reading your insights from all over the world. Now let's see how Althea finishes what she started. While Julian sat in a holding cell, stripped of his belt, his watch, and his dignity, Althea was at work. The hotel suite had become a war room. Silas Thorne sat across from her, his laptop glowing with the amber lines of a dozen different bank ledgers. The Nova Strategic accounts were no longer a mystery, they were a roadmap of Julian's greed. He hadn't just been preparing to leave Althea. He had been preparing to leave his life. He had systematically embezzled nearly $40 million from his firm's top-tier clients who included some of the most litigious and powerful figures in the tri-state area. He was using the lottery win as a smokescreen, Silas explained, his voice low and clinical. He planned to reinvest his winnings into the firm to cover the holes in the accounts before the annual audit next month. By claiming a fake win, he thought he could bridge the gap with loans. But since the ticket was flagged as a fraud, those loans are being called in immediately. Every bank he contacted yesterday has flagged him for suspicious activity. He's not just broke, Althea. He's underwater by tens of millions. Althea stared out at the city skyline. The power imbalance that had defined her marriage for 15 years had flipped so fast it almost gave her vertigo. For a decade, she had been the invisible partner, the one who handled the guest lists, the charities, and the emotional labor of a high-pressure marriage, all while Julian treated her like a decorative piece of furniture. He had underestimated her mind, forgetting that before she was a wife, she was a woman who could find a missing penny in a billion-dollar haystack. His arrogance had been his blind spot, and she had parked her entire future right inside it. The ticking clock was now Julian's greatest enemy. By Monday morning, his firm's board of directors would meet. By Monday afternoon, the clients whose money he had borrowed would receive an anonymous packet containing the true destination of their funds. The offshore accounts Althea had meticulously unmasked. Julian thought his only problem was a fake lottery ticket. He didn't realize he was about to face a pack of wolves he had been stealing meat from for years. Althea felt a flicker of the old grief, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of Julian's face as he told her she had 60 minutes to leave her home. On Saturday morning, Julian was released on a massive bail, funded by the last of his accessible liquid assets, money he had intended to use for his new life. He emerged from the precinct looking haggard, his suit rumpled, his hair uncharacteristically messy. He immediately tried to call Althea, but his number was blocked. He went to their estate, only to find a private security team at the gate, the same team he had hired to evict her. Only now they weren't taking his orders. Mrs. Vance has filed a temporary restraining order and an emergency motion for exclusive occupancy based on the documented financial fraud, the guard said. His voice as cold as Julian's had been 48 hours prior. Julian was forced to check into a mid-range hotel, the kind of place he usually scoffed at. He spent the night pacing the small room, his mind racing. He still didn't understand how the ticket was fake. He had found it in his briefcase. He remembered buying one, didn't he? Or had he just seen the numbers and convinced himself he'd bought it? The gaslighting he had practiced on Althea for years was finally working on himself. He was drowning in his own narrative. He decided he would go to the firm on Sunday to clean things up, unaware that Althea had already provided the security codes to the federal investigators. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with the words, "The house wins." It lets us know you're following the intricate details of Althea's brilliant strategy. We see you and we appreciate every single one of you who stays until the final reveal. Now back to the moment the walls truly began to crumble. Sunday morning brought a chilling silence to the Vance Investment Group headquarters. Julian let himself in through the side entrance, his heart hammering. He needed to delete the Nova files. He needed to make the trail disappear. But when he opened his office door, he didn't find an empty room. He found 3 men in dark suits and a woman with a badge. "Mr. Vance," the woman said, "we've been expecting you. We've had some very interesting conversations with your wife and your lead auditor over the last 24 hours. It seems your Nova project has a few accounting discrepancies." Julian didn't fight. He didn't scream. He simply sat down in his leather chair, the chair that cost more than a teacher's yearly salary, and put his head in his hands. The game wasn't just over. It had been rigged from the start. He realized then that Althea hadn't just reacted to his betrayal. She had anticipated it. She had known he would try to discard her, and she had built a safety net out of his own crimes. The choice that would destroy her had actually been the choice that set her free. He looked up at the investigators and asked, "Where is she?" "She's exactly where she belongs, Julian," a voice said from the doorway. Althea stepped into the room, flanked by Silas Thorne. She wasn't wearing a disguise today. She was wearing a sharp charcoal gray suit, her hair pulled back in a professional knot. She looked like the auditor she used to be, precise, formidable, and entirely in control. "The board has already met," she said, her voice steady. "They've stripped you of your voting rights. The clients have been notified. And the house? The house is being sold to cover the restitution for the people you robbed." Julian looked at her with a mixture of hatred and awe. "You planned this. The ticket. You put it there." Althea walked to his desk and picked up a small glass paperweight. "I gave you a choice, Julian. If you had come to me on Tuesday and told me about the win, if you had said, 'Althea, we're rich, let's fix our marriage,' I would have told you the truth. I would have shown you the real ticket. We could have been happy. But you didn't. You saw a way to get rid of me and you took it without a second thought. You chose the money over the person who spent 15 years building your life. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. I didn't destroy you, Julian. I just gave you enough rope to do it yourself. You were so busy looking at the numbers on that fake ticket that you never bothered to look at the woman standing right in front of you. She turned to the investigators. I believe you have everything you need. The password for the encrypted server is loyalty. It's a word Julian never could quite grasp. She walked out of the office, leaving him to the sirens and the shame. The public setting where the final truth exploded wasn't a courtroom, but a high society gala held 3 weeks later. It was the same charity event where Elena had first bought the ticket. Althea arrived alone, wearing a gown of midnight blue. The room went silent as she entered. The disgraced wife was now the woman who had single-handedly exposed one of the biggest investment frauds in the state. But more importantly, she was the woman who had just claimed the legitimate $300 million jackpot. She had waited until the legal dust had settled, until Julian was behind bars awaiting trial, to step forward. She stood on the stage as the guest of honor, the woman who was donating $50 million to establish a foundation for victims of financial abuse. As she spoke, her voice was calm, intelligent, and controlled. She didn't mention Julian by name. She talked about the value of transparency, the importance of integrity, and the fact that power is only as strong as the foundation it's built on. In the back of the room, a few of Julian's old friends looked down at their drinks, unable to meet her gaze. They had all underestimated her. They wouldn't make that mistake again. The moral of our story today is one of quiet strength and the inevitable weight of the truth. Julian believed that status and wealth were shields that made him untouchable, forgetting that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one you've pushed into a corner. Althea didn't win because she was lucky. She won because she was prepared. She chose to value her own worth over a lie, and in doing so she reclaimed her life. Remember, friends, that the way we treat people when we think we have nothing to lose says everything about who we are. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end. This has been a journey of betrayal and brilliant justice, and we hope it gave you something to think about. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to help our community grow. We'd love to hear your final thoughts in the comments. Was Althea's revenge too cold? Or was it perfectly earned? Let us know your moral lesson from today's tale. From all of us here, thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next story. Be kind to one another.